All right, this is a quick video to explain, actually it's just to explain proportions, go over similarity in another video, probably the second part of the week. So just hopefully this is a review for a lot of you with proportions. So ratio is a comparison between two quantities. What we're going to talk a lot about, we're not going to get into it in this video, but what we're going to do a lot with this is we're going to take two triangles and we're going to compare them because they're at certain ratios to each other. And that's going to be called, that's where the similar part comes in. They're going to be called similar triangles. We're going to talk about that in the next video. But then you're going to have to set up a ratio, like if this side is 6 and it matches up to this side over here, which is 2, then the ratio is going to be 6 compared to 2. And that's what we're going to talk about when we get to similarity. But for now, ratio just compares two quantities. Different ways to write ratios. You could write it as a fraction. This is the way that we're going to write it most of the time. You could write it with the colon, so 1 to 2. You could write it with the word TO in it, 1 to 2 that way. Any of those are acceptable ways to write a ratio. A proportion just sets two ratios equal to each other. So the way that we're normally going to write it, or the way you've probably seen it in the past, it looks like this. So it might look something like 3 over 4 equals 6 over 8. That's a proportion. Another way you could write a proportion, you'll notice I put A, B, X, and Y in here. You could write it this way, A colon B, and then X colon Y. You could write it out in words. You could write it out in words where you compare A to B, and that equals X compared to Y. And then the last way here, in math a lot of times we'll call whatever term's in this spot the first term. This is your second term, third term, fourth term of the proportion. That's just another way to explain it. The reason I want to explain it that way is because these next two things, extremes and means, if we're looking at this, and if I wrote it this way, first colon second equals third colon fourth, you probably noticed that the first and the fourth are the ones that are out the farthest. Well, those are called your extremes. The extremes are the first and the fourth terms of a proportion. The means are the other two. They're the ones that mean sort of tells you in the middle. So they're the ones in here that are in the middle. So second and third terms are the means. We're not going to do a whole lot with that, but that's just what you should know. And the reason you should know that is because when you go to solve a proportion, and we are going to do this, the actual mathematical rule for solving a proportion is that you multiply the two extremes together and set it equal to whatever the means are multiplied together. So you multiply the extremes equals the means multiplied together. And that's what I have down here. Multiply the extremes together, you multiply the means together. So if I'm looking at this proportion that I had up here where I said 3 compares to 4, the same as 6 compares to 8, Your extremes are going to be the 3 and the 8. So we multiply 3 times 8. And our means are going to be 4 and 6. So 4 times 6. And you end up with 24 on this side, 24 on this side. Now, most of you know probably when you're doing proportions, you don't usually have all 4 numbers. When you're doing a proportion, to solve them, you cross multiply. And you probably had teachers in the past that taught you to draw these little bubbles around them. However they taught you, that's fine. It makes no difference to me, but most proportions would look something like this. 2 compares to 3, the same as x compares to 7 or something like that. And you're going to multiply these 2 numbers together, the 2 and the 7. And you're going to write that answer down, so that'd be 14. And then you're going to multiply the other 2 together, the 3 and the x, and then that goes on the other side of the equal sign. Then we're going to solve a few of these, and the ones that we're getting ready to solve, they are on the worksheet that you were sent. Again, on the worksheet, you can write your answers on a separate sheet of paper. You don't have to print it out or anything. It'd probably be easier for you to work it right off the computer and write your answers on a separate sheet and then send me that. So some examples how to solve proportions. Again, if your teacher, and I usually won't do it, but if your teachers in the past have taught you to draw the little bubbles around them when you cross multiply, that's fine, go ahead and do it. Normally I won't do it, but here we're going to multiply these 2 numbers together, so we get 4x. Whatever we get there is always going to equal. Don't forget to put your equal sign in there. Then we multiply the other direction, which is 18. A lot of these answers on your worksheet won't come out even. Give me the decimal answer. You can round it off to 1 or 2 places behind the decimal. Just use your common sense and make a decision on how you're going to round it off. You could leave it as a fraction if that's easier. That's totally up to you. I'll know both answers. Here we divide both sides by 4. 4's over here cancel out. We're left with x equals 4 into 18. 4 won't go into 18 evenly. But if you divide it, and I don't have my calculator right here handy, but so if I divide this, 4 will go into 18 4 times. That's 16 with 2 left over. You could write it 4 is your whole number. This top is your whole number. So it'll be 4 and 2 over 4, which will reduce to 4.5. You could write your answer that way. You could write your answer as 4.5. If you use your calculator, either one of those answers would be correct. When we start, in the next section, when we start dealing with triangles and stuff, or any kind of shapes, it doesn't have to be triangles, but normally it will be, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to set up these proportions. So you're going to say like 3 compares to 13, the same as V compares to 3, and you're going to set it up. We'll talk more about that next time. I just wanted to mention it. Here, same idea, we're going to cross multiply. So I multiply these 2, so I got 3 times 3 equals, going the other direction, I got 13 times V. You can do, I know I'm working this out step by step. You can shorten this up a little bit to help yourself out. 3 times 3 was 9. You could have probably done that right off the bat. 13 times V is just 13V. You divide both sides by 13 to get the V by itself. These cancel out. You're left with V equals, 13 won't go into 9 evenly, and if you divide it out on your calculator, it's probably going to give you some crazy decimal. So it might be easier just to leave it as 9 over 13. V equals 9 over 13. And you can try on your calculator to reduce it by using the ABC button like we did in class before. 9 over 13 actually won't reduce, so that's probably the best answer. Next one on this one. This one's got an 8n in here. Doesn't really change anything, so don't make it harder than it is. You're still going to do cross multiply this way. You got 8n times 3. That's on one side of the equal sign. Then on the other side, you got 8 times 8. Again, you could shorten this up by doing these steps together. 8n times 3, all you do is multiply the 3 and the 8, so you get 24n, just like you would have done in algebra last year. 8 times 8 is 64. Trying to get n by itself, so we divide both sides by 24. These cancel out, you're left with n equals, 24 won't go into 64 evenly, but if you grab your calculator and take 64 divided by 24, I end up with 2.6 repeating. And you should know, you got to start to understand that when you have that 0.6 and it just keeps going out on your calculator, we talked about this in class, that's the same as 2/3. So this would be 2 and 2/3 would be the best answer to give. If you give me an answer, if you round it off and say 2.7, I probably wouldn't mark it wrong. It's just not as precise as you could be. Next one, we cross multiply. This way we got 14 times x, well that's 14x. We cross multiply this way, 7 times 9. Don't forget your equal sign in there. 7 times 9 is 63. Trying to get x by itself, so we're just going to divide both sides by 14. These cancel out, you're left with x equals, again, 14 won't go into 63 evenly, I don't think. So we grab our calculator and try it and see what it comes out to be. And we'll decide what to do with it. So if we got 63 divided by 14, we end up with 4.5. It came out 4.5 on the calculator, so that would be our answer. X would equal 4.5. Again, all 4 of these problems are on your packet. You can find them on there, and so I just gave you 4 answers there. Use them to try to help you understand, make sure you remember how to do proportions. The next 2 a little harder. There's also problems like this on your packet. These 2 are also on the packet. First thing, anytime you have a proportion and it has something like this in it, where it's got x minus 3 as one of the terms in the proportion, the very first thing I do is I put parentheses around it. So if I go over here to this next one, I put parentheses around this, and I'm going to put parentheses around this also. Here's where you might have to do the steps out step by step to make it a little easier. When we cross multiply this way, or not so much easier, but you won't mess up near as much. When we cross multiply this way, it's just 10 times that whole thing. So I'm going to write 10 with the parentheses times x minus 3 equals, when I cross multiply that way, it's x times 9, so 9x. Now you got an equation that you should have seen in algebra last year, and all you're going to do here is you're going to distribute this out. So it's going to be 10x minus 30 equals 9x. Now you're going to solve it just like any other equation. You're going to get all the x's on one side. Well, I'm going to subtract 10x on both sides. I know that that's probably not how your algebra teacher told you. They told you to take the smallest one to the largest one, but this is going to take one less step this way. These cancel out. You're you're left with negative 30 equals 9x minus 10x is negative 1x. To get x by itself, we divide both sides by negative 1. These cancel out, and you're left with just x equals a negative 30 divided by negative 1. Use your calculator if you need to make sure you're getting your signs right. Equals 30. So x equals 30 in that case. Next one, same idea on this. When I cross multiply this way, I end up with 9 parentheses p plus 10 equals, when I cross multiply the other way, I got 8 parentheses, or 8 times p minus 7. Write it out this way because a lot of times you'll make little careless mistakes if you try to do the distributing in your head. We distribute here, we get 9p. 9 times 10 is 90. Over here we distribute, we get 8p. 8 times 7 is 56, so minus 56. Make sure you watch your sign there. There's a positive times a negative, so it's a minus 56. Next thing I'm going to do, solve it just like any other equation. I'm going to get all the p's on one side. 9p minus 8p is 1p plus 90 equals a negative 56. Trying to get the p by itself, so I want to subtract 90 on both sides. I end up with 1p, or just p, equals a negative 56 and negative 90. Grab your calculator and do it if you need to. When you're just putting them together and they're both negative, then your answer is going to be a negative, and you're just adding the two numbers together. And that ends up being negative 146. So there's some examples of this packet. Again, send your answers to me on a separate sheet of paper. It's probably the easiest way. You don't have to print off the packet or the pages itself. Just send them on a separate sheet. We're going to use this next time. You need to know how to solve these because this is going to lead us into using them to solve, to find missing parts of triangles and stuff, and solving different kinds of real world or word problems.